Hey guys, today we're going to talk about our last section of notes for the entire year. We're going to look at the modern world global economy. In addition, don't forget to do your interactive map. That'll be the last of those for the year. So let's start off here. Global economy. And we are going to start here in the post-World War II world in Asia. Now, we already looked at what happened in Europe and how Europe was able to recover Western Europe because of the Marshall Plan and how Eastern Europe had kind of been under the influence of the Soviet Union as part of the Eastern Bloc. All right. However, what we're going to look at here is Asia first, and we are going to look at this Asian nation that will become a leader in manufactured goods and is a economic superpower, and that is Japan. And we're going to see that Japan focuses on its economy rather than its military because the United States and Japan have a strong alliance in the post-World War II world. And you've seen many of these Japanese companies here in the United States as well. All right, continuing on here. So we're going to divide our countries into three different economic categories. The top category are going to be what are called our developed nations. These are countries that are industrialized, okay? Meaning they have higher, they're factory based, right? Producing manufactured goods, modern transportation, etc., etc. Higher GDP per capita, which means the average amount of money that each person has is higher in these areas. You see this like United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. These are developed nations, okay? Then we're going to move to what we call emerging nations. This is where like Mexico and China and Brazil, they're in these that are undergoing economic growth. You can see all these areas here in green. And what we see is a lot of factories in these developed nations are now moving to these areas because it's cheaper for them as far as salaries. But the biggest thing is for benefits, right? The amount of like insurance and costs and all those things that go towards a business. If any of your parents own businesses, ask them what their biggest cost is. It's not the salaries, it's the benefits that they have to give to their employees. In addition, the regulations that those companies have to have are less in those countries such as China, Russia, India, Mexico, Brazil, etc., etc. Excuse me. And then lastly, we have our least developed nations, aka our LDCs, sometimes referred to still as third world countries that we talked about. And these countries here are going to be countries that their economies are based off of raw materials. Okay, they produce raw materials, okay, and the developed nations turn them into manufactured goods for higher cost. These are kind of your whooping boy countries of the world, mostly in Africa, Southeast Asia, areas of the Middle East. Okay, but what we're seeing is all these different countries of the world are coming together, and when one thing happens in one part of the world, it affects in other countries in another part of the world because our world is becoming more of a global economy, or you'll see the word globalization. Okay, and a lot of corporations are becoming multinational corporations, meaning that they are based not just in one country, right? There are McDonald's all around the world, right? If you ever watch the movie Pulp Fiction, what do they call a quarter pounder of cheese in France? It's a Royale with cheese because they don't have the metric system, or they're on the metric system, etc., etc. That's an inside joke if you ever watched that movie. Very good movie. All right, moving on. So another huge thing in our economy is oil. All right, and 79% of the world's oil is controlled by this international organization called OPEC. OPEC stands for organization or uh, Organization of Petroleum and Exporting Countries. Okay, and they control most of the world's oil, and so they determine how much oil they want to let out into the economy, and they want to keep oil prices high, so they kind of limit supply. The idea of supply and demand. Demand for oil is always the same, but how much supply is out there determines the price. Okay, and so most of the members of this are in the Middle East, though you can see some other areas here that are part of OPEC. Now, we can see that OPEC has used oil as a weapon because so many countries rely on them, including the United States, for oil production. And so during the Yom Kippur War, remember when we talked about the Arab Israeli conflict, uh, they didn't like, those are Arab nations, they didn't like that the United States and Western Europe were supporting Israel, and so they put an embargo on our oil because of our support for Israel. This forced us to force peace talks to happen that we talked about, that happened between Egypt and Israel, where Israel removed troops from the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, right? So you can see here, right, Western developed nations, please, sir, we'd like some more. And OPEC, controlling the bowl here, not of porridge, but of oil. Okay. Next up here, again, talking about globalization, one of the keys to trade is what we call free trade, okay, where countries don't put tariffs on each other. Remember, a tariff is a tax on goods that you import from other countries, or embargoes would stop countries from trading with you. Okay, the idea that whoever can provide the cheapest and best goods, those are the ones that are going to be purchased. Okay, what we call trade barriers. And that increases the amount of international trade, sometimes to the disadvantage of a domestic country, right? If too many people buy foreign items. But what we're going to see is that in order to compete with the United States and the Soviet Union, Europe kind of began steps of free trade in 1947. Now, there's all these different organizations. I'm not going to talk about those. When I used to teach at AP Euro, we went into them. Really started off with coal and steel, but over the years it has developed into a lot more of other manufactured goods, until finally in 1993 came the big organization that it is today, and that is the EU, which stands for the European Union. And so again, the European Union is a collection of European countries. I think it's like 47 now. Well, I'm way over that. It says 28 here. That was in 2017. But somewhere around there, England's trying to drop out of it. But that's something that's going to constantly change here, the number that are there. But part of the way that they try to do this free trade to increase trade is they have their own currency called the euro. So that way, when you bought things from Germany, you didn't have to change into a Reichmark or Deutschmark, I'm sorry. And when you buy something from Britain, you didn't have to turn into a pound, or you go to France, you didn't have to use a franc, Spain a lira, etc., etc. They use one currency called the euro, and it's a very stable currency, worth slightly more than a U.S. dollar bill. All right. So in response to this, in 1994, North America created its own free trade organization called NAFTA between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Now, the word NAFTA is kind of a cuss word in my family, though, because it is often blamed for why factories moved to Mexico when there was no downside to trade with Mexico. Many of those organizations moved to Mexico because of lower salaries, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason it's a cuss word is because Phillips was a huge plant in Ottawa, where I grew up, and had like over 2,000 workers, one of which was my father since he was 18 years old. And they moved that company to Mexico. So that was a big deal. But anyways, so that's why it's controversial. All right. Hope you guys. Well, I got one more here. I'm sorry. Last thing here, we're looking at the environment. All right. This is a big thing here. 25% of the world's population are in developed nations, yet we use 75% of the world's energy. Okay. And so what we're trying to get away from is using things that are non-renewable energy, like oil and coal, even though they are cheaper. Okay. You can see here gas, et cetera, and trying to go to what we call green growth or renewable energy sources, things like wind power, water, solar, okay, geothermal, biomass. All right, these are all different things that are trying to happen so that way our environment is not messed up in the future. All right, something that is a big topic when it comes to politics. It's funny because I'm conservative by nature, but I'm liberal when it comes to the environment. And our current presidency is not so nice to the environment. But anyways, I don't want to get too political on you. Sorry, Sal. You guys take care. Have a good night.